Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking into the case between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni over their film It Ends With Us. We got a bunch of stuff from you guys, articles, social media posts, even a couple of video clips. So let's jump in and see what we can find out.
Yeah, this case is really interesting, I think, because it kind of shows how these Hollywood power dynamics can really play out, especially with the whole hashtag Me Too movement as the backdrop.
Right, and of course we've got Blake Lively, who everyone remembers from Gossip Girl, and then Rustin Baldoni, who's known for Jane the Virgin and kind of more heartwarming films. And now they're kind of locked in this public legal battle.
Right.
And the very beginning of all this was Lively claiming that Baldoni had sexually harassed her on the set of the film that he also produced and starred in, which is It Ends With Us. But get ready because it gets kind of crazy. We got leaked footage, text messages that bring in Taylor Swift and Ryan Reynolds, bullying accusations. Even people are comparing this whole thing to Game of Thrones.
Yeah, it really does. It sounds like a script itself, but the implications are very real.
Yeah, so let's just start with Lively's allegations. She claims that Baldoni, kind of crossed the line during a scene where they were slow dancing and there wasn't even any dialogue.
Yeah, so specifically, Lively is claiming that while they were filming this intimate scene, Baldoni leaned in and kind of ran his lips from her ear all the way down to her neck and even made a comment about how good she smelled. And according to Lively, this was completely out of character and made her feel uncomfortable.
Okay, so we're talking about some serious accusations here. But so Baldoni's team counters by releasing footage of that scene. So what do we think about this?
Well, this is where it kind of gets complicated. The footage does show them slow dancing, Lively and Baldoni, and you can hear them chatting about their spouses. So Baldoni's team is saying this footage proves that Lively's lying and that everything was totally professional.
Right, but Lively's team's not backing down, are they? They're saying that the release of the footage is all just a PR stunt and that if you look at Lively's body language, it's obvious that she's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a he said, she said situation, right? And this video just makes everything more complicated. It's really hard to know what's actually going on just based on a short clip.
Right.
And both sides are, trying to use it to their advantage, trying to, shape the story how they want.
Right, and just when you think it can't get any more complicated, we have this text message where Lively compares herself to Khaleesi from Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And she says she has a couple of dragons on her side.
Right. This text message has kind of become this central piece of the whole thing. It was Lively responding to Baldoni, saying that he was worried she was using, her A-list friends to kind of influence the film. And Lively basically says, that she's the one in control, just like Khaleesi.
And I guess we're talking about Taylor Swift and Ryan Reynolds. Those are some pretty big dragons to have on your side.
Yeah, definitely. So according to Baldoni, Lively invited him over to her place to talk about some changes she wanted to make to the script.
Okay.
And during this meeting, Taylor Swift and Ryan Reynolds just show up.
Wow.
Like they just happen to be there, and they start saying they agree with Lively's ideas.
I mean, can you imagine what was going through Baldoni's head in that situation? It's like you said, some serious star power there.
For sure.
I mean, he says he felt intimidated and pressured by the whole thing, especially since Swift has, a huge fan base.
Right. I mean, whether they meant to or not, just them being there really shifted who had the power. It puts Baldoni in a really tough spot, and I think it's understandable that he felt like it was some kind of power move.
Yeah. And it gets even more interesting, I guess, when Baldoni's lawyer claims that Ryan Reynolds used his film Deadpool and Wolverine to take a jab at Baldoni and the whole situation.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there's this one scene where Reynolds' character is talking about making a podcast that makes money from the women's movement, which a lot of people are saying is a dig at Baldoni's podcast, Man Enough, which is all about, men's issues and feminism. Of course, it's open to interpretation, but you can't deny it adds more fuel to the fire.
Right. And then to top it all off, there are these reports that Lively and Reynolds demanded that Baldoni and his entire family be seated in the basement during the film's premiere. I mean, what do you even say about that?
Yeah, that's really hard to just ignore. I mean, Baldoni's saying it was just a way to humiliate him, something Lively and Reynolds planned to make him look bad. And then these pictures came out online showing him and his family watching the premiere on a screen, tucked away in the basement. Whether it was a power move or not, it doesn't look.
No, it doesn't. And then we have Candace Owens jumping in, criticizing Lively for the nice things she said about Woody Allen in the past, even with the sexual abuse allegations against him.
Yeah, Owens is making a good point. Lively has called Woody Allen an empowering director before. Owens is basically saying that she's a hypocrite. She's all about the hashtag Me Too movement now. But it seems like she was defending this guy who was accused of abuse.
Right, and Owens even asks, she's like, where was that energy for Dylan Farrow? You know, Alan's adopted daughter who's accused him of abuse, so that adds a whole other layer to how we see Lively's position in all this.
It shows how things you did or said in the past can come back to haunt you, especially in a public fight like this. It puts Lively in a tough spot because now she has to explain how she can support Alan and also stand with the hashtag #MeToo movement.
It seems like everybody's trying to control the story, and the truth is getting lost.
Yeah, it's clear that how the public sees all this is a big deal in this case. Both sides are trying to manage their image using leaks, saying certain things to the press, and even bringing in these famous friends to try to get the public on their side.
So, like, what does all this tell us about how power works in Hollywood?
I think it shows how power can be used to manipulate what people believe. Whether it's Lively using her connections or Baldoni, leaking that video, they're both using what they have to try to control the story.
Right. So it kind of reminds us that we're often only getting a carefully constructed version of events, and we really need to be careful about what we choose to believe.
Exactly. We need to remember that there's always more than one side to every story, and the truth is usually somewhere in between.
It really does feel like we're peeling back the layers of like some Hollywood onion here, and every layer is just more and more complicated. I mean, it's not as simple as he said, she said, right?
What's so interesting here is that, this case really makes us rethink those typical power dynamics.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got Lively. She's obviously super successful and influential, and she's accusing this powerful guy in the industry. But then Baldoni is saying that he's the one who's actually being bullied, and, his name's being dragged through the mud, and he's pointing to Lively's, A-list friends as proof.
Right. I mean, having Swift and Reynolds involved just, adds a whole other level to all of this.
Exactly.
Just them being at that script meeting, like you said, regardless of why they were there, it sends a really strong message.
Yeah, for sure. And if we kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture, it makes you wonder about how these subtle power dynamics, these unspoken things,
Yeah.
How do they actually play out, not just in Hollywood, but in any job or even in our own lives?
Yeah.
It makes you think about how just someone's presence or, the people they know can affect a situation, even if nothing is directly said.
Yeah. And then there's that whole thing with Deadpool and Wolverine. Some people might think Reynolds is just being petty, but others might see it as him, being clever and fighting back against what he thinks is unfair.
Right. It's hard to say for sure what Reynolds was thinking, but it definitely adds to the whole, public feud narrative. And that's where social media and the 24/7 news cycle really come in. Every comment, every post, every retweet, it's all part of the story, and it all has the potential to change what people think.
Right, and then we have the whole thing with Baldoni and his family being made to sit in the basement during the premiere. I mean, it's hard to imagine that that wasn't done on purpose.
Yeah, I mean, how things look really does matter. And it definitely fits into the story that Lively's using her power to, push Baldoni aside and control how people see things. It's a good reminder that, how we act and how we treat others can have a big impact on what people think of us.
Right. And all this kind of brings us back to Candace Owens and what she said about Lively praising Woody Allen. It's kind of, an uncomfortable thing to think about, that sometimes what we did in the past doesn't match up with what we believe now.
Yeah, what's interesting about what Owens is saying is that it brings up this bigger conversation that we're having as a society about, taking responsibility, being consistent, and this whole idea of separating the art from the artist. Can we or should we, separate what an artist creates from their personal life, especially when there are accusations of bad behavior? It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer.
Yeah, it makes you realize that we're all changing and growing, and, our views can change over time, and we should try not to judge people just based on things they did in the past without thinking about the context and whether they've grown since then.
Right, and it shows how hard it is to talk about these sensitive issues in public. Everything you say, everything you do, it's all under a microscope. It's hard to be nuanced or admit that you've changed without people saying you're being a hypocrite.
So it's like we have these two competing stories, and each side has their own version of the truth, and the public is left trying to figure it all out. It just reminds you that what we see in the media, especially when it comes to celebrities, is usually a very carefully curated version of reality.
It really raises this interesting point about how powerful stories are. We're all drawn to stories, and we want to believe the ones that fit with what we already believe and what we've been through. But this case shows how easily those stories can be manipulated, especially when there's a lot on the line.
It makes you wonder how much of what we think is true is actually based on, facts and how much of it comes from the stories we're being told.
Yeah, we need to be skeptical. We have to question where information comes from and look at things from different angles before we form our own opinions. Especially now, in the digital age, with information spreading so quickly, it's more important than ever to be critical thinkers.
So where does that leave us? We have these accusations of sexual harassment, but the evidence is all over the place, and both sides are saying the other is lying and manipulating things. Plus, you have this whole added layer of celebrity influence, which just makes it even more complicated. It's a mess.
It's definitely a cautionary tale about how perception, truth, and critical thinking all kind of clash, especially with so much information bombarding us constantly. This whole case is like a mini version of bigger struggles we're dealing with as a society, where power, social movements, and what the public thinks all get tangled up in this, messy and confusing way.
It makes you think about, how easily someone's career, their reputation can be ruined even before, anyone's officially charged them with anything or there's been any kind of trial.
Yeah, this case really shows how risky this cancel culture can be.
Yeah.
Baldoni's career has definitely taken a hit. His podcast lost a co-host. People are all over him. His reputation's been tarnished. And all this happened before anything's even been decided in court.
Right. It's scary to think that just accusations, especially when they blow up on social media and in the news, can do so much damage. It makes you wonder, like, what's going to happen to both Lively and Baldoni in the long run, even if, they win the case.
Yeah, and it brings up these important questions about due process and, innocent until proven guilty. Are we so quick to judge that we're forgetting about fairness and the right to a fair trial? Are we like sacrificing being careful and thoughtful just so we can, make a judgment quickly?
And on top of all that, Lively's, Game of Thrones thing, which I guess was supposed to show how strong she is and how she's in control, kind of backfired, didn't it?
It really does. It shows how important it is to think about what you say, especially in a situation like this where there's so much at stake. You have to be really careful about how you communicate and how your words might be understood.
It seems like everything they say, everything they post, every time they're seen in public, it's being analyzed and picked apart for some hidden meaning. That's a lot of pressure.
Right. It makes you realize you got to be careful before you hit send on anything.
Exactly. And, at the end of the day, we're all human. We all make mistakes. I think it's important to give people the chance to grow and change and, to see that people can learn from what they've done in the past.
Exactly.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I keep coming back to this question. What does all this mean for the hashtag #MeToo movement? Is this like a step backward?
Well, the hashtag #MeToo movement has been so powerful. It's really shined a light on how much sexual harassment and assault is out there. And this case doesn't, erase the progress that's been made or take away from what people have gone through and bravely shared. But it does show how tricky it can be to deal with these issues publicly. And it reminds us that we need to be careful. We need to make sure everyone gets a fair process, and we need to be committed to being fair.
Right. It reminds us that getting justice isn't just about pointing fingers. It's about having evidence, a fair process, and being willing to hear everyone's side of the story.
Yeah, this case isn't just about Lively and Baldoni. It's about these bigger conversations we're having about, who has power, who's held accountable, and this, ongoing fight for equality between men and women. These are complicated issues, and there are no easy answers.
Right. But hopefully, by talking openly, thinking critically, and really trying to understand each other, we can move closer to a world that's more just and fair.
Absolutely. And that's the big takeaway here. We need to have these conversations, but we need to be thoughtful, empathetic, and willing to question our own assumptions. In this case, even though it's messy and complicated, it gives us a chance to think about our own beliefs and biases and to try to understand these complex issues better.
This deep dive has definitely given us all a lot to think about. We've looked at the accusations, the evidence, all the different sides of the story, and what it all means for society. It's been quite a journey.
It really has. It's been a journey into the heart of Hollywood, showing us the power struggles, the carefully constructed public images, and the real human stories behind all the headlines. And I think it reminds us that even in the world of glitz and glamour, finding the truth and getting justice can be a really messy and difficult thing.
And that's your deep dive. We hope this helps you understand this case a little better and, get involved in these important conversations. Keep those questions coming, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.